stood before the Galactic Council with his four arms trembling at his sides. His skin had turned pale, almost translucent, and his large black eyes held a haunted look that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. He was a member of one of the oldest and most feared warrior species in the known galaxy. His people had conquered 17 star systems. They had crushed civilizations that had existed for. They had never known defeat until they met the humans. The council chamber fell silent as began his testimony. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, because he knew that what he was about to tell them would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy and its inhabitants. It began, he said, at the edge of human space. The Armada had been traveling through the outer regions of the galaxy, searching for new worlds to conquer and new species to subjugate. That was what they did. That was what they had always done. They found the weak and they crushed them. It was the natural order of things. When their sensors detected the human colony world called New Montana, the High Command saw only another easy target. The planet was small, home to perhaps 2 million humans and their primitive settlements. The fleet numbered 400 warships and carried over 200,000 ground troops. The outcome seemed certain. Was serving as a diplomatic at the time, a position that required him to observe and document all first contact situations. He was aboard the flagship when the human vessel appeared. It was a single ship, small and unremarkable, broadcasting peaceful intentions and requesting permission to negotiate. The High Commander, a massive warrior named, laughed when he saw it. He allowed the human ship to dock, more out of amusement than anything else. He wanted to see what these creatures looked like before he destroyed them. The human delegation consisted of only 2 individuals. The first was a male named Commander Sam. He was tall for a human, with short brown hair and calm eyes. He wore a simple military uniform without any visible weapons. The second was a female named Lieutenant Kate Marshall. She was shorter than her companion, with red hair pulled back from her face and green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She carried a small device that later learned was used for recording and translation. Remembered studying them as they entered the council chamber aboard the flagship. They looked so fragile, he thought. Their skin was soft and unarmored. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs. They moved slowly compared to warriors. Everything about them suggested weakness. Commander spoke first. His voice was calm and steady, without any trace of fear or uncertainty. He thanked the High Commander for agreeing to meet with them and expressed his hope that this situation could be resolved peacefully. He explained that New Montana was a civilian colony, home to farmers and scientists and families. These people posed no threat to the Empire. High Commander leaned forward in his throne, his 4 arms crossed over his broad chest. He told the human that they did not negotiate with lesser species. He said that New Montana now belonged to the Empire. The humans could surrender immediately or they could die. Those were the only options. Watched Commander carefully during this exchange. The human did not flinch. He did not show any sign of fear or anger. He simply nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. Then the commander said something that would never forget. He said that humanity did not wish for war. He said that his people were peaceful by nature and preferred to resolve conflicts through diplomacy. But he also said that if they attacked New Montana, humanity would respond with force. And he said that they would not like what happened next. The chamber erupted in laughter. High Commander slammed his fist against his throne and demanded to know if this weak little creature was threatening him. He pointed out that they had conquered species far more powerful than humanity. He reminded the commander that his fleet could reduce New Montana to ash within hours. Commander did not raise his voice. He simply repeated his warning. He said that humanity had a long history of war. He said that his species had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing. He said that if they forced humanity to fight, they would discover just how dangerous humans could be. Lieutenant Marshall spoke for the first time then. She asked the High Commander if he had ever studied human history. She asked if he knew about the conflicts they called World War I and World War II. She asked if he understood what humanity was capable of doing to its enemies. Dismissed them with a wave of his arm. He gave humanity 48 hours to surrender New Montana or face total annihilation. He told his guards to escort the humans back to their ship. As Commander and Lieutenant Marshal were led from the chamber, noticed something strange. The humans were not afraid. They did not seem worried or desperate or panicked. Instead, they seemed almost sad, as if they were making this decision. Lieutenant Marshal glanced back at as she passed him. Their eyes met for just a moment. She shook her head slightly, as if she was disappointed in him personally. That look haunted for days. He kept thinking about it, trying to understand what it meant. He requested permission to study the human species in more detail, hoping to find some explanation for their strange confidence. What he discovered kept him awake at night. He learned that humans came from a planet called Earth, a world so hostile that their scientists classified it as a death world. He learned that their species had evolved alongside predators and diseases and natural disasters that would have wiped out any other intelligent race. He learned that humans had survived not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the most adaptable and the most persistent creatures on their planet. He also learned about their capacity for violence. He read about their wars, their weapons, their strategies and tactics. He discovered that humans had been killing each other for as long as their species had existed. They had turned warfare into a science and an art. Brought this information to High Commander, hoping to convince him to reconsider the invasion, but dismissed his concerns. He said that every species in the galaxy had wars. He said that primitives fighting with sticks and stones posed no threat to warriors with plasma rifles and orbital weapons. The 48 hours passed. Humanity did not surrender, and so the invasion of New Montana began. Watched from the command deck as the landing craft descended toward the planet's surface. 200,000 soldiers, the finest warriors in the galaxy, armed with the most advanced weapons their civilization could produce. He felt certain that victory would come swiftly. He had no idea that he was about to witness the beginning of the end of everything he had ever believed about his species and their place in the galaxy. The ground forces landed on the plains outside the main human settlement of Haven City just as the sun rose over the distant mountains. Watched the operation from the orbital command ship, studying the tactical displays that showed every soldier, every vehicle, every weapon in the invasion force. 200,000 warriors spread across the landscape like a living carpet of armor and gleaming plasma rifles. Hover tanks floated into position along the flanks. Artillery units established firing positions on the high ground. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The human defenses appeared pathetic in comparison. Long-range sensors detected approximately 12,000 human soldiers taking positions around the city. They carried primitive kinetic weapons that fired metal projectiles instead of plasma. Their vehicles rolled on wheels and treads instead of anti-gravity generators. Their aircraft looked slow and clumsy compared to fighters. High Commander stood at the center of the command deck, watching the displays with satisfaction. He announced that this battle would be over within hours. He predicted that the humans would break and run the moment the advance began. He ordered his generals to prepare for victory celebrations. The Human Defense Force was led by two officers whose names would later learn. Colonel Ben Torres commanded the ground troops. He was a stocky man with dark hair and a face that suggested years of combat experience. Major Amy led the air support units. She was a small woman with sharp features and cold eyes that missed nothing. Together, they had prepared a welcome for that would change the course of galactic history. The battle began at dawn. High Commander ordered a traditional assault, a massive wave of infantry supported by hover tanks and air cover. The strategy had worked against every enemy they had ever faced. Overwhelming force applied at a single point would break any defensive line. The first wave of 50,000 warriors advanced across the open ground toward the human positions. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who had never known defeat. Their plasma rifles were charged and ready. Their officers shouted commands in the harsh language. Victory seemed certain. Then the ground itself seemed to erupt. The humans had spent weeks preparing for this moment. They had buried artillery positions deep underground, hiding them from sensors. They had laid thousands of explosive devices across the approach routes. They had calibrated their weapons with precise mathematical calculations that accounted for every variable. When Colonel Torres gave the order to fire, all of those preparations came together in a single devastating moment. Watched in horror as the tactical display turned red, explosions tore through the advancing lines. Artillery shells rained down from hidden positions. Rockets screamed across the sky, leaving trails of white smoke behind them. In the first 6 minutes of combat, 15,000 soldiers died. High Commander roared with fury and ordered more troops into the battle. He refused to believe that primitives with chemical weapons could stop an assault. He sent wave after wave of soldiers forward, certain that the humans would eventually run out of ammunition. The humans did not run out of ammunition. What happened next was something they had never encountered before. The humans called it combined arms doctrine, a method of warfare that coordinated ground troops, air support, artillery, and electronic systems into a single unified killing machine. Every element of the human defense worked together with perfect precision. When soldiers advanced, artillery drove them back. When they sought cover, aircraft struck from above. When they tried to communicate, electronic warfare systems jammed their signals. Studied the battle with growing dread as the hours passed. The humans did not fight like any species he had ever observed. They did not meet in open combat. They did not try to match strength against strength. Instead, they used the terrain, the weather, the time of day, everything around them as weapons. They struck from unexpected angles. They set traps and ambushes. They forced them to fight on ground of their choosing. Colonel Torres moved his forces with a fluid grace that seemed almost organic. Units appeared where the least expected them and vanished before counterattacks could be organized. Soldiers fired from concealed positions and then relocated before targeting systems could lock onto them. The humans fought like shadows, always present but never quite where they thought they were. Major coordinated the air support with ruthless efficiency. Her pilots attacked supply lines, communication centers, and command posts. They avoided direct confrontation with fighters, instead using speed and surprise to strike vulnerable targets. When anti-aircraft units tried to shoot them down, they had already moved to another sector. By midday, they had lost 40,000 soldiers. The humans had lost fewer than 200. High Commander refused to accept what the tactical displays were showing him. He demanded that his officers explain how primitives could inflict such casualties on warriors. He accused them of incompetence and cowardice. He threatened to execute anyone who suggested retreat. Tried once more to make the High Commander understand. He presented analysis of human military history, explaining that this species had been fighting wars against itself for thousands of years. He showed examples of human tactics from their own records, demonstrating that what they were witnessing was not luck or accident but the result of centuries of refinement. Humans did not just fight wars. They studied them, analyzed them, learned from them. Every battle made them more dangerous. Dismissed his concerns again. He ordered a massive armored assault, sending every hover tank in the invasion force against the human lines. He believed that sheer firepower would overwhelm the enemy defenses. The tanks advanced across the plains in a formation that would have been intimidating against any other opponent. But the humans had prepared for this as well. They had positioned anti-armor weapons in hidden bunkers. They had dug trenches that channeled the tanks into kill zones. They had planted explosive devices that disabled hover systems and dropped the vehicles to the ground where they could not maneuver. The armored assault lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 80% of the tank force was burning wreckage scattered across the plains. As the sun set over New Montana, stood at the observation window and looked down at the battlefield below. They had lost 80,000 soldiers in a single day of combat. The humans had lost 400. It was the worst military defeat in history, and the High Commander was already planning to send more troops to their deaths tomorrow. Realized then that they had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that their superior technology and greater numbers would guarantee victory. They had not understood that humanity had something far more valuable than advanced weapons. Humans had experience. They had been killing each other since the dawn of their civilization. They had developed tactics and strategies that no other species could match, because no other species had survived the brutal crucible of endless warfare that had forged humanity. The thought they were predators who had found weak prey. They were wrong. They were the prey, and they had just discovered that they were being hunted by the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced. Began composing his first report to the Galactic Council that night. He knew that what he was witnessing would change everything. He just did not yet understand how much. The war continued for another week, and each day brought new horrors for the forces. High Commander committed more and more troops to the invasion, refusing to accept the possibility of defeat. He believed that sheer numbers would eventually overwhelm the human defenses. He was wrong, but his stubbornness meant that thousands more soldiers marched to their deaths on the plains outside Haven City. Received new orders from the Imperial Court. They wanted to understand how a primitive species was destroying their finest warriors. They assigned him to study humanity in depth, to learn everything he could about their history, their culture, their methods of war. They believed that knowledge would reveal some weakness that could be exploited. Accepted the assignment, though he suspected that what he discovered would only confirm his worst fears. He began with human historical records. They had captured data archives from human outposts at the edge of their space, and these contained extensive documentation of human civilization. Locked himself in his quarters and began to read. What he found made his blood run cold. Human history was a chronicle of endless violence. They had fought wars over territory, over resources, over religion, over ideology, over things so abstract that could not understand why anyone would kill for them. They had developed weapons of increasing destruction, from simple blades to firearms to explosives to chemical agents to nuclear devices. They had killed millions of their own kind in conflicts that lasted years and consumed entire generations. Read about something humans called World War I. He learned that over 20 million humans had died in this single conflict, slaughtered by artillery and machine guns and poison gas. He read about the trenches where soldiers lived like animals, surrounded by mud and corpses and disease. He read about battles where hundreds of thousands died to capture a few miles of worthless ground. Then he read about World War II, and what he learned there disturbed him even more. 60 million humans had died in this war. Entire cities had been destroyed by fire and explosives. The humans had developed nuclear weapons, devices that could destroy a city in a single flash of light, and they had actually used these weapons against each other. They had killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in moments and called it a necessary evil. Did not sleep that night. He kept reading, kept learning, kept discovering new depths to human violence. He learned about concepts like total war, where every aspect of a society was mobilized for conflict. He learned about mutually assured destruction, where humans had built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their own planet multiple times over. He learned that humanity had come close to annihilating itself on several occasions, and had only avoided extinction through luck and last-minute restraint. He also learned about human adaptability. When new weapons appeared, humans developed new tactics to counter them. When enemies tried new strategies, Humans studied them and created responses. Every war taught humanity new lessons, and they applied those lessons to the next war. They had been refining their methods of killing for thousands of years. After 3 days of research, requested permission to interview captured human soldiers. High Commander granted his request reluctantly, still refusing to believe that understanding the enemy could be more valuable than simply destroying them. The prisoner was a human male named Sergeant Danny. He was young by human standards, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and brown eyes that showed no fear despite his situation. He sat calmly in his cell, his hands bound behind his back, watching with quiet curiosity. Asked him why humans were so good at war. He expected the soldier to boast or threaten or try to deceive him. Instead, Sergeant just shrugged his shoulders and spoke honestly. He said that war was what humans did. It was in their blood, in their history, in their very nature. Humans had been fighting since before they could write or build cities. They had fought animals for survival, then fought each other for territory, then fought over ideas and beliefs. They had never stopped fighting, not once in their entire history. Asked if this troubled him. He asked if humans ever wished they could be peaceful, could live without violence and conflict. Sergeant smiled sadly at this question. He said that yes, many humans wished for peace. They wrote songs about it and made art about it and dreamed of a world without war. But wishing did not change what they were. Humans were predators, he explained. They were hunters who had conquered every environment on their planet and then reached out to conquer the stars. Violence was part of their nature, and they had learned to use it with terrible efficiency. He said something else that would never forget. He said that humans did not enjoy killing, but they were very good at it. And when someone threatened their families, their homes, their way of life, they became something much worse than warriors. They became monsters. Left the cell feeling more disturbed than when he entered. He sought out another human, hopping for a different perspective. This one was a civilian, a military historian named Doctor who had been working at a research station when the invasion began. She was older than Sergeant, with hair and tired eyes that suggested she had seen too much in her lifetime. Doctor was not hostile, but she was not friendly either. She answered questions with the detached manner of a scientist discussing a research subject. She explained human military philosophy in simple terms: adapt and overcome, never surrender, fight to the last breath. These were not just slogans, she said. They were principles that humans lived and died by. She showed him records of human soldiers who had fought impossible battles rather than accept defeat. She told him stories of guerrilla campaigns that lasted decades, of resistance movements that survived against overwhelming force, of individual humans who sacrificed their lives to protect their people. Asked what would happen if they continued the war. He asked how far humanity would go to defend itself. Doctor looked at him for a long moment before answering. She said that humans would do whatever was necessary. They would burn their own cities rather than let them fall to enemies. They would sacrifice millions to protect billions. They would use every weapon they possessed, no matter how terrible, if their survival was at stake. She said that they had awakened something old and dangerous. Humanity had spent centuries trying to overcome its violent nature, trying to become civilized and peaceful. But the capacity for violence was still there, buried deep inside every human being. It just needed the right provocation to emerge. Returned to his quarters and began writing a new report. He described what he had learned about human history and human nature. He explained that they were not fighting an ordinary species. They were fighting creatures who had turned warfare into an art form over thousands of years of constant practice. He recommended immediate withdrawal from human space. He argued that continuing the war would only result in more deaths and eventual defeat. He begged the imperial court to listen to reason. His report was ignored. High Commander was already planning an even larger assault. He had sent messages demanding reinforcements from the Empire. He believed that more soldiers and more weapons would solve the problem. Knew that more were going to die. He just did not yet understand how many. The reinforcements arrived 3 weeks after the initial invasion. 1 million additional soldiers, the largest ground force the Empire had assembled in 3 centuries, descended upon New Montana with orders to end the human resistance once and for all. High Commander stood on his command deck and watched the landing craft darken the sky. He was certain that this massive display of force would finally crush the primitives who had humiliated him. Watched as well, but he felt no confidence. He had studied human history. He had spoken with human prisoners. He understood now that numbers alone would not guarantee victory against this species, but he could not convince anyone to listen to him. The strategy was simple. They would advance on Haven City from 3 directions simultaneously, overwhelming the human defenses through sheer weight of numbers. Each of the 3 attack columns consisted of 400,000 soldiers supported by artillery, armor, and air cover. Nothing could stand against such force. The humans responded by abandoning Haven City. When scouts reported that the human population had evacuated, High Commander declared victory. He believed that the humans had finally realized they could not win and had fled into the wilderness to hide. He ordered his forces to occupy the city and prepare for the next phase of operations. But the humans had not fled, they had repositioned. Colonel Ben Torres had studied the terrain around Haven City for months. He knew every valley, every ridge, every forest and river and hill. He had identified the perfect location for a decisive battle, a place where the advantages in numbers would become a deadly weakness. The humans called it Crimson Valley. The valley was long and narrow, surrounded by steep cliffs and dense forests. A single road ran through its center, the only route capable of supporting heavy vehicles and large troop movements. Torres evacuated the civilian population and moved his forces into prepared positions along the valley walls. Then he waited. They took the bait. Their sensors detected human military forces in the valley, and High Commander ordered an immediate assault. He sent his entire central column, 400,000 soldiers, marching into the valley to destroy the enemy. They marched into a trap. The humans had spent weeks preparing kill zones throughout the valley. They had planted explosive devices under the road. They had positioned artillery on the high ground where weapons could not reach them. They had hidden infantry units in caves and bunkers carved into the cliff walls. Every inch of the valley had been designed to maximize casualties. Captain Jack Mercer commanded the Orbital Drop Marines who held the eastern wall of the valley. His soldiers were elite troops, the best humanity had to offer, trained for years in the most demanding conditions imaginable. They watched the column enter the valley and waited for the signal to attack. Brigadier General Cole commanded the armored divisions on the western wall. Her tanks were positioned in hull-down positions, their weapons trained on the road below. She had calculated firing solutions for every possible target area. When the time came, her gunners would not miss. The signal came at noon, when the column was fully committed to the valley and could not easily retreat. Colonel Torres gave a single order, and the valley erupted into chaos. Artillery shells rained down from the heights, exploding among the packed formations. Anti-armor weapons targeted the hover tanks, destroying them before they could return fire. Infantry units opened up with automatic weapons, cutting down soldiers by the hundreds. Explosive devices detonated under the road, creating craters that blocked movement and trapped vehicles. Watched the tactical display from orbit as the blue icons representing soldiers began to disappear. They vanished by the thousands, then by the tens of thousands, wiped from existence faster than he could count. The valley floor became a killing ground where soldiers died in waves, unable to advance or retreat or even find cover. The humans used weapons that had never seen before. Thermobaric munitions consumed all the oxygen in their blast radius, suffocating soldiers who survived the initial explosion. Autonomous drones hunted through the forests, tracking wounded who tried to escape and eliminating them without mercy. Something the humans called white phosphorus burned through armor and flesh alike, creating wounds that would not stop burning. Captain Mercer led his Marines in precise strikes against command positions and communication centers. His soldiers moved like ghosts through the smoke and chaos, appearing from nowhere to eliminate officers and specialists before vanishing again. Every time they tried to organize a defense, the Marines disrupted it. General Cole coordinated her armor with deadly efficiency. Her tanks fired from concealed positions, destroyed their targets, and relocated before fire could reach them. They could not pin down her forces because they were constantly moving, constantly adapting, constantly one step ahead. Witness something that would haunt his dreams forever. A human pilot named Lieutenant Cooper was flying close air support when his aircraft was struck by anti-aircraft fire. His vehicle was crippled, burning, falling from the sky. Any rational being would have ejected, would have tried to save themselves. Lieutenant Cooper did not eject. Instead, he turned his dying aircraft toward a command post and flew directly into it. The explosion killed hundreds of enemy soldiers and destroyed the command center that was coordinating the defense of that sector. He sacrificed his life without hesitation. He died so that his fellow humans might live, and realized that this was not unusual. This was normal for humanity. They were willing to die for each other, to sacrifice everything for victory. The slaughter continued for 3 days. By the end, the valley floor was carpeted with bodies. 900,000 soldiers had entered Crimson Valley. Fewer than 50,000 emerged alive, and most of those were too traumatized to fight. The survivors told stories that spread panic through the remaining forces. They described human soldiers who advanced through fields of their own dead without flinching. They described weapons that seemed to target individual soldiers with impossible accuracy. They described drones that hunted them through the forests for hours, never stopping, never resting, until every last straggler was eliminated. High Commander suffered a mental breakdown when he received the casualty reports. He had to be sedated and removed from command. His replacement, a more pragmatic officer named Vice Commander, immediately requested permission to negotiate a ceasefire. The humans agreed to talks, but they did not stop fighting. Transmitted his observations to the Galactic Council in a message marked as highest priority. He described the massacre at Crimson Valley in clinical detail. He explained that they had lost nearly 1 million soldiers in a single engagement. He emphasized that the humans had achieved this with fewer than 20,000 troops and technology that appeared primitive by galactic standards. He concluded his message with a warning. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. They were a species to be avoided. Any civilization that threatened them would pay a terrible price. The Council received his message. Whether they would believe it was another matter entirely. The war ended 6 weeks after the massacre at Crimson Valley. Vice Commander negotiated a ceasefire with human representatives, and what followed was the most humiliating surrender in history. The empire that had conquered 17 star systems, that had crushed civilizations and enslaved billions, was forced to accept terms dictated by a species they had dismissed as primitives. The peace treaty required them to surrender 4 star systems to human control. They were forced to pay reparations that would cripple their economy for generations. They were prohibited from entering human space without permission, and they were required to provide detailed accounts of all military capabilities to human intelligence officers. Was assigned to the diplomatic team that finalized the treaty. His superiors believed that his studies of humanity would prove useful in the negotiations. They were right, though not in the way they expected. The negotiations took place aboard a human space station orbiting a planet called New Boston. had never been inside a human installation before, and what he saw there disturbed him almost as much as the battles he had witnessed. The station was filled with soldiers. They walked through the corridors in small groups, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. They carried weapons openly, and their movements had the fluid grace of predators who were always ready to fight. Even the civilians moved with a certain alertness, a readiness for violence that seemed bred into their very bones. Met with Admiral Price, the commander of the human fleet that had defended New Montana. The admiral was an older man with hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to look straight through anyone who stood before him. He spoke softly, but every word carried weight. The admiral explained the terms of the treaty in simple language. He was not cruel or gloating. He was simply matter of fact, as if the destruction of 1,000,000 soldiers was just another administrative matter to be handled. Asked him a question that had been burning in his mind for weeks. He asked why humanity had not destroyed the fleet in orbit. The humans had obviously possessed the capability to do so. Why had they shown restraint? Admiral Price looked at him for a long moment before answering. He said that humanity did not want to exterminate they wanted to defeat them, to stop the invasion, to protect their people. But they had no interest in genocide. That was not who they were. Found this difficult to believe. He had seen what humans could do. He had watched them slaughter soldiers with cold efficiency. He asked how a species capable of such violence could also show mercy. The admiral smiled at this, though his eyes remained cold. He said that humans understood violence better than any other species in the galaxy. They knew its cost, its consequences, its terrible price. And because they understood it so well, they tried to use it only when necessary. He said something else that chilled to his core. He said that everything they had witnessed, all the death and destruction and horror, was humanity holding back. Did not understand at first. He asked what the admiral meant. Admiral Price explained that the forces deployed to New Montana represented less than 2% of human military capability. The weapons used were standard issue, nothing special by human standards. The tactics employed were textbook doctrine, the kind taught to junior officers in basic training. He said that humanity had fought this war with one hand tied behind its back. They had deliberately limited their response, because they did not want to demonstrate their full capabilities to the galaxy. They did not want other species to know what humanity could really do. Felt his blood run cold. He asked what would have happened if they had attacked civilian targets. He asked what would have happened if they had bombarded human cities from orbit. Admiral Price's expression changed then. His eyes went hard and his voice dropped to a whisper. He said that if they had killed human civilians, the response would have been very different. He said that they would no longer exist as a species. Every world they had colonized, every station they had built, every ship that flew under their flag would have been reduced to ash. He said that humans had rules of war. They tried to protect civilians and treat prisoners with dignity. But if an enemy chose to ignore those rules, humanity would respond in kind. And no species in the galaxy could match the darkness that humanity was capable of embracing when its people were threatened. Left the meeting in a daze. He returned to his quarters and sat in silence for hours, trying to process what he had learned. They had sent 1,000,000 soldiers to conquer a small colony world. They had believed that their superior numbers and technology would guarantee victory. Instead, they had been crushed by a fraction of human military power. And the humans had been holding back. Thought about the records he had studied, the histories of human warfare that stretched back thousands of years. He thought about the weapons they had developed, the strategies they had perfected, the capacity for violence that seemed woven into their very nature. He realized now that humanity was unlike any other species in the galaxy. They were not conquerors seeking to expand their territory. They were not predators hunting for prey. They were survivors, shaped by millions of years of evolution on a death world, hardened by thousands of years of constant warfare against each other. They had emerged from their crucible of violence as something new, something dangerous, something that the galaxy had never seen before. Completed his testimony for the Galactic Council the next day. He stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species and told them what he had witnessed. He described the battles, the tactics, the weapons. He explained human history and human nature. He showed them records and statistics and analysis. And then he gave them his recommendation. He said that the galaxy should never provoke humanity. They should never threaten human families or attack human homes. They should never give humans a reason to unleash their full potential upon the stars. Because had seen what humans could do when they were trying to minimize casualties. He had seen the cold efficiency with which they destroyed their enemies. He had looked into the eyes of human soldiers and seen the ancient predator that lived within each of them. He never wanted to see what would happen when humanity stopped holding back. The council chamber fell silent when he finished speaking. Representatives exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered among themselves in voices too low for to hear. In the back of the chamber, a human diplomat named Laura sat quietly, observing the proceedings. She had been sent by her government to witness the testimony, to ensure that their former enemies told the truth about what had happened. When finished his warning, when he told the council to never give humanity a reason to show its true face, Laura smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible from across the chamber, but saw it. And in that moment, he understood that the galaxy would never be safe again. Humanity was awake. Humanity was watching, and humanity would never forget those who had tried to harm them. The stars themselves seemed colder as walked out of the chamber. Somewhere in the distance, aboard ships and stations and colonies scattered across 1,000 worlds, humanity waited. They were peaceful now. They were restrained. But deep within every human heart, the ancient fire still burned. And if anyone was foolish enough to fan those flames, the galaxy would burn with them.